What's up everybody? So I guess you had not really expected this particular site, but I figured that for the video I'm gonna be making today, which is my top 10 games of the decade, I wanted to take a bit more of a personal approach to the video again, because yeah, 2020 is finally here. I want to wish you all a happy new year, of course, while I still can, but it also means that a decade is behind us, and I've seen many people, you know, share their lists of their favorite games of the, you know, the last 10 years, and I figured I wanted to do pretty much the same thing, but once I started actually listing everything down, right, the first thing I noticed is just the sheer amount of amazing games that I had to leave out, because the list is going to be limited. You can only talk about 10 games that came out in the span of 10 years, and so, yeah, naturally there is just going to be a bunch of those games where you already know people in the comments are going to be like, well, where is this game and this title, and did you forget this one, or, you know, stuff like that. So I wanted to make it clear, like, yeah, if you're going to make a list like this, you have to ultimately pick the games that really stood out for you on a personal level, that impacted you, and where you have, like, personal stories and memories to share. So maybe in this list, the games I'm going to be talking about won't necessarily all have the most positives and the least negatives compared to all the other games that came out, but these were games that were personally impactful to me. And I think that is the beauty of it, is just the fact that everybody will have, hopefully, a drastically different looking list at the end of the day, right? Because everybody has different experiences, and everybody has games that stood out to them personally over the last 10 years of gaming. So make sure to let me know your lists in the comments, of course. I'd love to, yeah, to hear from you all, what you really, you know, what stood out to you and what really, I guess, stuck with you, right? But for now, all that leaves me to say is let's actually get into it. Let's talk about my personal top 10 games of the decade. So at number 10, we're gonna kick things off with one of the most recent games. I thought this was simultaneously a great opportunity to actually announce my personal Game of the Year 2019, because I hadn't done so yet. Won't come as a surprise to anybody, let's be honest. I'd been talking about this game for years already, and maybe that's actually the big thing about it, is that the years leading up to the launch of this game were honestly maybe just as significant as the release of the actual game itself. That is because, you know, me personally, having played games for so long now, it's easy to feel a sense of fatigue every now and then. It's like, you know, you just feel like I've done this all before, right? You've got your usual open world games, your shooters, action adventures, RPGs, and whenever a new game gets announced these days, I generally feel like I have a good impression already of what to expect. This was a game that promised to do the opposite. It not only showed an intriguing setting that had never been basically done before in a game and that looked completely weird and, you know, out of place, right? But it also promised brand new gameplay concepts. And you could argue whether it delivered on those ultimately. I'd say that for me, the experience felt super fresh and I absolutely loved it. Some people didn't, and that's cool as well, right? Once again, it's not about these games necessarily having to be unanimously considered great. This was what stood out to me, and I thought, yeah, in terms of gameplay, it really did bring me something that I hadn't played before. That's what I really appreciated it for, and story-wise, I absolutely loved it. Like I said, you all know which game I'm talking about. At number 10 is Death Stranding. Death Stranding is the rare case where a game expresses its core message through all of its gameplay facets. You forge connections by working together with other porters around the world who you can't see but you know are right there with you. I would have never thought that the gameplay loop of delivering packages from point A to B could be so addictive, but by offering the freedom to decide my own path, to make me consider which tools and equipment to bring along, and to challenge me to take on as many orders as I possibly could, I ended up 5-starring every single facility with a smile on my face. But for me, the true reward for finishing this journey was the payoff at the very end. Seeing the story come to a satisfying close with a cast of characters that stuck with me and all whose motivations I truly began to understand, no matter the fact they perhaps conflicted with one another. Death Stranding's mind-blowing world, bizarre yet fun gameplay concept, and revolutionary online elements made it feel like a breath of fresh air. A game at the exact right place and the exact right time. So at number 9 is a very personal pick. This is a game that I don't think many others would actually be mentioning in their list, but it's a game that for me came completely out of nowhere and that did something I hadn't ever expected a game anymore to do, which is that when I grew up and I played Super Mario World as a, like 5-year-old pretty much when I started with that game, I felt to that day that there would never be a 2D platformer game that could match the feeling of perfection I felt with Super Mario World. Like, I thought that was the ultimate 2D platformer. None were ever gonna beat it, basically. But I was proven wrong. This game came out around PS4's launch. You might remember, if you actually owned a PS4 in those first couple of months, that it was particularly dry, right? Like, we had a couple of games that kept us busy. Generally speaking, it was like, it was rough. We were waiting for the next game every like 2 or 3 months basically, and then a game would come out and we'd have to wait another 2 or 3 months for something interesting to basically be released. This was a game that actually had come out officially the year prior already on the last gen consoles, but because I was so busy with focusing on the next gen, at least in my mind, and a bunch of other great games that came out in the year prior, of course, this had completely not been on my radar. So when I actually bought it for just $40, I later on felt like I had almost, freaking deceived, I guess, the publisher, because, yeah, this game totally deserved me to have paid full price. Especially now realizing that it ended up at number 9 in my list of, the 10 best games this decade, right? So at number 9 is Rayman Legends. Rayman Legends isn't just an incredibly stylish 2D platformer, it brought me some of the most fun in gaming I've ever had. Distinctly floaty animations initially took a while for me to get used to, having grown up with the precise movement of the Mario games. But then it all began to set in, and I did not want it any other way. A large number of worlds all introduce fresh and exciting gameplay mechanics, while the fantastic music levels are given as a reward for completing a new set of levels. In these, you maintain running speed as you time jumps and punches with the beat of the songs, all variations of popular tracks like Eye of the Tiger. I had an absolute blast collecting all the teensies, getting the gold medals, and going back to all the best Rayman Origins levels included as well. For over 4 years, I kept occasionally booting up Rayman Legends to partake in the weekly challenges, trying to set the best score until at last the platinum was in my possession. To this day, whenever I just feel done with it all, when I'm tired of the daily activities or don't know what else to play, the cheerful sounds of Rayman Legends animated characters welcome and pull me back in. And then we get to number 8. I think this is a pretty safe pick, honestly. It is gonna be the game that most people will be at least having somewhere in their list, I would imagine. And also the one where if you were to ask me to make like an objective list, right? Objective as far as I can do that, but if you were to ask me to make an objective list of the best games that came out, this would have to be somewhere on top, if not number 1. I think this is objectively the game of the generation, because it is the ultimate package. It had an amazing story, fantastic gameplay, great characters, world. It even, it dared to change a franchise around that had been stuck in a certain pattern and came out better because of it. Few games can do that these days. If they try to change something around, it's usually for the worst. This game completely did everything from scratch and was ultimately respected by almost everyone. By now, I would assume you know which game I'm talking about. Number 8 is God of War. God of War's gigantic, two-sided accomplishment cannot be understated. It revitalized a series that had slowly begun to fall from grace by heading into an all-new, story-driven and up-close direction. The third-person camera perspective initially had everyone, including myself, worried somewhat, but with the help of a visceral new combat system and the introduction of the retractable axe quickly made me forget about those fears. The storyline, fleshing out Kratos' personality with the help of his son Atreus, who was used to get those new emotions out of him, put me on the edge of my seat the entire way through. It led up to a few intimate moments and perhaps the most epic reveal that had me sitting there with my jaw wide open. And while this story was a self-contained one, the few remaining questions that are left continue to excite me, knowing that this was only the beginning. God of War laid the foundation for an extremely promising future, writing the entire plot with an ultimate outcome already in mind. So at number 7 is once again gonna be a very personal pick, and I gotta warn you in advance, there are gonna be 2 games in this list that will feel really out of place. They felt out of place for me too. I initially didn't even think about these games because, you know, that's the thing, when you start to think about putting together a top 10 list of the decade, or, you know, just a game of the year contender or something, you don't think about these kinds of games. At least I don't, because these are both gonna be PC games, and this will be the very first one. Why is that? Well, because they're super gameplay driven and they don't necessarily offer anything else than that. But nonetheless though, I realized that I would be lying to myself if I didn't actually include them, for the simple reason that I put the most time into these games in the last 10 years, so I have to include them because they were a huge part of this last decade for me. The very first one, yeah, I remember very well. I was going to university and naturally a bunch of my classmates were playing games on their laptops and stuff, you know, while we should all be studying, we were all just playing games in the meantime. And this was the one where, you know, I looked at it and I'm like, I don't want to play a goddamn card game. You know what I mean? It looked so dumb to me. It looked like just time wasting essentially. But my classmates forced me to basically download it and to play against them. And here we are now. I actually looked it up before making this video, and I have put around and about 1,500 hours into this game, which has made it my most played game of the last decade. And why is that? Well, not necessarily because it's like so amazing to play, but it's just the ultimate game to play alongside doing other activities. Like, I love watching YouTube videos, catching up on podcast episodes, stuff like that, while playing this game at the same time. At number 7 is Hearthstone. Hearthstone's secret lies in how effective it is in its simplicity. If you're like me, then the premise of a card game sounds extremely boring from the outside, but through smooth and satisfying animations and playing at relatively fast pace, it hooks you in from the start. Anyone can learn the basics within the span of a few hours, and that's when it opens up to reveal a huge depth in possible deck combinations and different playstyles. You could attempt to control the board with lots of powerful minions, rushing the enemy heroes head-on to tackle them within just a few turns, or even wear them out by forcing them to draw all of their cards and losing thanks to fatigue damage. I can safely say I haven't spent a single dollar that I know on any other forced-in microtransactions over the last 10 years, but being the free-to-play game that it unfortunately is, Hearthstone was the only one to succeed in making me ignore my moral compass. Then again, these developers earned my money, because for 6 years straight they've managed to keep me entertained and statistically made this my most played game of the entire decade. So I'm going to be cheating a little bit with the number 6, because this is not just about this one game alone, and I think also, you know, many people would be surprised putting this game this high, because it is certainly a flawed game. Like, I have to admit that, and I can totally get behind it myself. That being said, this game would not have been as impactful on me if it wasn't for the awesome journey that I went through beforehand. And once again, I think it's a great thing where, like, I started to realize how awesome it is to have a community follow me on YouTube, because this was also, I think, all the way back in 2014, when I had just been on YouTube for like 2 years or something, and I had built up a small audience, is that I started getting a lot of recommendations, and I started getting people to genuinely care about which games I played and recommending me to play certain ones, right? I had made a video about very popular game franchises that I had actually missed out on myself, that I'd never gotten around to playing, and just to talk about why, and like not understanding, I guess, what those game franchises are really about, and being intrigued to get it at some point. And this was the one that jumped out, where I had most people recommending me to go through this series. But that was a bit of a daunting task for me, because it forced me, in order to catch up and to play the latest release that was on the horizon at that point, It forced me to play through 4 other games across several generations, including the PlayStation 1. And me personally, I tend to have a hard time going back to very old games. Like, you know, the outdated graphics and controls and stuff. I usually just can't do it. Call me a casual, whatever you want, but like, I don't know, I kind of look up to that. Like, I don't look forward to stuff like that. Nonetheless, I found myself on my PlayStation Vita, actually playing through the first 3 installments and then dusting off my PS3 even to play the 4th one. And when I did, it had come completely full circle and I was like, wow, this was so worth it to actually play. I initially wasn't the biggest fan of this series for the gameplay necessarily. I played it for the story. It's a very convoluted story, but nonetheless, by the time I'd beaten the 4th game, I felt like I had gone on this amazing journey that totally, like the 4th game paid off everything in terms of story for me. But like I said, there was the fact that the gameplay had never really been its strongest component to me and what I necessarily enjoyed. And then the 5th game came out, and that's the one we're talking about here actually, in 2015. And it did the total opposite. Where I had expected a great story, I was ultimately disappointed by that, but it didn't matter as much for me because I felt like the journey had already somewhat come to an end with the 4th installment, and it had closed everything off and there weren't many questions left, really. So the fact that this 5th game didn't deliver on that was not the biggest issue to me, but what I was blown away with was how much I enjoyed the gameplay. In fact, it is what I would call the smoothest, most satisfying, the best gameplay experience I've had this generation. At 6 is Metal Gear Solid 5. Metal Gear Solid 5 left me downright baffled, where my view of the series could have been summarized as an awesome character-driven adventure with frankly second-rate gameplay, where merely shooting an enemy would sometimes require you to press 4 buttons all at once. All of a sudden, here was the 5th entry, forcing me to completely change my definition around by delivering the most mechanically sound gameplay experience of the entire generation. The Fox engine was worth those many years of development, because running into bases with D-Dog, tranquilizing enemies with your silenced pistol, and Fulton extracting them to your base, all the while playing in a silky smooth 60 frames per second, it never became stale. 100 plus hours later, I had not just completed 60 main missions, but each of the 157 side ops as well. And even though the overall narrative might have lacked in memorable events, I just couldn't let that spoil the fun. The journey that had started 1 year ago had finally come full circle. So at number 5 I have a pretty straightforward pick, although I do think actually that most people will probably include the sequel rather than this one. But for me it was about the fact that it was simply more impactful at the time. I remember very well being skeptical about this game. Like, this one came out almost exactly 10 years ago in 2010. I think at the exact same time Skate 3 came out, which was like the sequel to one of my favorite games ever made, Skate 2. And so I very much wanted to get it, but it also felt like it had come out at a bit of a wrong time. You know, just a year later. It felt like a cash grab from the beginning to me, in a way. And this was a game that did something completely different, that offered a setting that I wasn't necessarily a huge fan of from the outside, but that I ended up becoming a much bigger fan of, I guess, in general. But it's also a open world game where, in the time of like the Ubisoftification of open world games these days, putting as many collectibles on the map and trying to justify your purchase by offering hundreds of hours of content, which are usually just the same old repetitive tasks that you can do, and then you just gotta do it to 100% the game basically. This was a game that I played for exactly the opposite reasons. I played it for the story, I played it for the awesome characters, and I played it to be there in that amazing world that Rockstar had created. Of course, I'm talking about Red Dead Redemption. The last decade has been saturated with open world games, but few have nailed the sense of atmosphere the way the original Red Dead Redemption did for me. I don't have any particular memory that comes to mind when thinking back to my time with John Marston. The image I see in front of me is a simple one, riding through the desert on horseback, accompanied by subtle music and the sound of wildlife. where open world games are now synonymous with hundreds of obligatory side quests, collectibles and other icons on the map, Red Dead Redemption is one of the few games that made me want to explore its world without feeling a need to cross off items on a checklist. I'd play poker and five-finger fillet to make some extra cash, I'd scavenge the map and search for gang hideouts or ride around some more just to clear my mind and to be there. While its outdated shooting mechanics sadly became a huge hurdle for me playing the sequel 8 years later, my standards were much different at the time, and I'd even put many hours with friends into the online. We'd posse up and play the game in co-op, or join the multiplayer modes, which always started off in an exciting Mexican standoff. Obviously, I'd be remiss not to mention the gut-wrenching ending, great character development, and the personal arc that John Marston follows, but Red Dead Redemption will forever stand out to me exactly for the reasons few other games can say they do. And then we get to number 4. This is another PC game. This is the second one out of the weird bunch that I told you would be included in this list. Yeah, I mean, what can I say about this, man? I gotta once again go back to my years in university. This was the game that was basically introduced to me by my classmates, because think of it like this, right? I entered university and that was in 2012. I didn't quite know what to expect. I didn't know who my classmates were gonna be, if they were gonna be gamers, what games they would be playing, right? And so I was a bit like unsure about that, and so I stepped in a bit nervously like everybody would in that first day in university, and I slowly got to meet who my classmates actually were. Well, it turned out they were all gamers, but they weren't gamers like me. You know, every single one of them, if I would ask, do you play games? They would answer yes. Ah, you play on PlayStation? No, I play on PC. There was one guy that's like, yeah, I play on console, and I'm like, finally, and then it turned out he was an Xbox gamer, but... It's, you know, basically everybody played on the PC, and there was one game that almost everybody unanimously also shared that they, for some reason, played, which is pretty interesting when you think about it in hindsight. They introduced me to it, and ever since I have been playing it. I play it to this day, together with a select group of ex-classmates now at this point, you know, that still play this game with me. We still organize LAN parties every 6 months to every year, basically, where we get together for an extended weekend, I guess, and we just play this particular game most of the time together. It's great fun, and I absolutely love this game. It's Counter-Strike Global Offensive. If you're fortunate enough to have the dedicated group of friends needed for it, only then Counter-Strike Global Offensive can shine as the ultimate tactical shooter it is. Matches are skill-based and even, only putting you up against players of the same rank, and relentless towards those who choose to leave an hour-long game early. Cooperation is required at all times. With your group members, you choose whether to gear up or save money for the current round. You communicate the locations of enemies and give other intel. It's a game that makes any other shooter look casual in comparison. Recoil of your guns is not shown via your crosshairs. You always have to be aware of the way each gun handles, and being able to pull off headshots is a must if you wish to gain the edge over your opponent. CSGO's custom modes and maps, designed by its large community, offered a great distraction to keep me going. Surfing turned into my personal therapy sessions. I put on some music and tried to complete either several stages or the longer linear maps. It's been a long road, full of ups and downs, but in a span of several years, where I once started as that console noob with a silver rank, I made it to DMG at my peak. I can truly say I learned to get good at Counter-Strike, but even then, I strive to get even better every day. And then we go to number 3. This is once again gonna be a bit, gonna feel a bit like cheating, because originally this game did not come out this decade, but I played it myself for the first time this decade, and we're talking about the remake of it. You probably already know which game I'm talking about, because it was my game of the year last year, and that already had some people like, feeling like, oh, that's blasphemy or whatever, but I just totally hadn't seen it coming, man. I mean, I knew what this game was about, I knew what made the game, I played a recent game of the same creator, right, that I really, really liked. But nonetheless, like, yeah, that had never given me an incentive to go back and actually play this until they announced the remake at E3. And I remember looking at the visuals and looking at, you know, just like the fact that it was, or that it looked like an adventure game and that it looked very much in spirit of the same game I had played. I'm like, yeah, I can't wait to actually play this remake. But that I would love it this much, I could not have possibly imagined beforehand. And I still to this day don't exactly know what it is. Like, it's a super simplistic game, I absolutely love that about it, but, you know, I just ended up... I beat the game like 7 times within a single week when it had just come out. And once again, it's a game where I love being in that actual world. Number 3 is Shadow of the Colossus. Shadow of the Colossus took me on a journey so magical I will never forget it. Describing the concepts and mechanics of this game, it would just appear basic on paper. You ride through a large, deserted open world in search for 16 giant colossi. Rather than testing your reaction times or quick thinking, each boss presents you with a simple puzzle, asking you to think outside of the box in order to find their weak spots to eventually strike them down. But the true power behind Shadow of the Colossus was found in the range of emotions I felt during every single second in this 8-hour adventure. The absence of any sound as you ride on your horse evoked a sense of beauty, yet terror and loneliness. It forced me to reflect on all my actions, contemplate whether I was even doing the right thing here, or if maybe these creatures didn't deserve to be harmed. A wonderful ending sequence fortunately provided the much needed answers I was honestly unsure I would receive at first, simultaneously leaving a few of its smaller mysteries open for my own interpretation. The enormous scale of the giant monsters, the amazing soundtrack that accompanies your encounters, it is unbelievable how with such ease I'm able to dismiss these qualities entirely when I'm asked about the thought that dominates my mind. If there was ever a world I would want to be transported to, this is where it would be. So now we are left at the last 2 games still to be talked about. Now, I actually did not write a script for these games, so that's the thing, words cannot describe how much of an impact these games have made, not just on me as a gamer, but literally all my life. Like, that sounds dumb and it sounds like, oh, I'm blowing it up too much or something like that, but it's true. The very first one, honestly, might have made or, you know, right now, I mean, number 2 that I'm talking about, might have made the biggest impact out of them all. And I can tell you already right now what it is, because like I said, I didn't write a script for it. It's Uncharted 3. And Uncharted 3, it's funny because I would actually look at it and I would, at first glance, call it a disappointing game, because I was very disappointed in the single player. I've always been open about that. This is the only Uncharted game that disappointed me in terms of single player. But we're not talking about the single player here, right? We're talking about the multiplayer. And it made such a huge impact on my life because this is a place where I have met so many friends. I've made enemies. I've started my YouTube channel because of this game. I started the Uncharted 3 Top 10 Plays simply for the reason that I absolutely love this game. I wanted to be featured in one of these countdown shows that other people had been making, including a friend of mine that I played the game, or that I was actively playing the game with. But because we weren't, I just decided to make my own series, and lo and behold, it was put on Uncharted TV by Naughty Dog, which caused my channel to blow up, which caused me to, like, start receiving hundreds of clips on a daily basis by random people on PSN. They would start subscribing to my channel, I would be making episode after episode, and from there on I actually expanded to making general YouTube content and growing an audience. And, you know, once again, for that simple reason, Uncharted 3 has to be at a super high position because, like, you know, again, it made such a huge impact on my life. I would not be here, and you would not be here watching this video right now if it weren't for Uncharted 3. So many memories of the multiplayer. I absolutely loved it, by the way, as well. Where the single player was disappointing to me, the multiplayer I absolutely loved. Spent hundreds of hours on it. Yeah, I recently talked about it in a video, you know, looking back at the multiplayer because it sadly had to be closed down last year. I still wish, if it was ever possible to bring them back, 60 frames on PS4, it would probably be my main multiplayer right now again, but realistically that's never gonna happen, sadly. Yeah, so many memories on that game. Like I said, made great friends, also in the YouTube scene with Uncharted 3. So many memories of actually making content for it. expanding from there, and it once again highlights my personal fandom of the Uncharted series, right? Like, this series has been with me for so long, and it has meant so much for me that not putting Uncharted 3 at number 2 would be absolutely insane. So then we get to number 1, and yeah, you know, once again, like, it feels dumb. You wanna add some variety to these lists and stuff, but I have to be honest with myself, and so at number 1 is obviously Uncharted 4, because this was not just the next Uncharted game that I was therefore very much looking forward to. It was promised to be the final one, at least Drake's final adventure, right? And that made a huge mark on me, and that made this last installment immediately feel so weighty. Like, it had so much weight behind it, just because I knew this would be the last time getting to actually go on an adventure with these characters. And you know, at that point my YouTube channel had obviously started taking off somewhat more. I still remember just the months and years of lead up to the launch of Uncharted 4, speculating about the game, talking about it with my subscribers, doing the One Last Time countdown series about 40 days in advance. I think I started it, doing a video almost every single day, talking in some way about what I was looking forward to in Uncharted 4, and having tens of thousands of you actually joining me in that, getting collectively excited for the game, and then to see it actually be able to deliver, like, there wasn't more you could wish from, right? Like, single player wise, I think this, in terms of story, Uncharted 4 has the best overall plot of the entire series. I had my little bits of criticisms naturally, right? Like, it took a bit of a slower direction, which I think was necessary for this final game, but at the same time, to then replay certain parts like Scotland or whatever, not necessarily the most fun. But, you know, this game, once again, it felt like it had so much weight on it already beforehand, and when playing it then, you know, that was just proven to be true, right? Like, I don't think I'll ever have as special of an experience as I did playing Uncharted 4 for the very first time. You know, like I said, for the very simple reason that I knew this was going to be the last time, you know, being able to do so. I also, you know, got to play it, not to brag or something, but I got to play it like 10 days in advance because Sony sent me a copy, and that was super special to me as well, because I had to actually keep all these great moments secret, like, you know, the Crash Bandicoot scene. I had to, you know, keep that secret to my girlfriend or whatever, who would absolutely fangirl out over something like that, because she was also a huge fan of Crash, right? And to you all, you know, and the ending, some of the plot twist, of course, that happens and stuff. Yeah, it was just all around, the Uncharted series has meant so much for my channel, and I could simply not, you know, I could lie to you all and not include these games in the list, or try to, you know, try to put something different at number 1 for a change, but let's be real. Yeah, I would just be deceiving you, no pun intended. But like, you know, you can't do that. You gotta keep it real with yourself and say, yeah, this is the franchise that stuck with me, that I've grown up with, that has meant so much for my channel, for my life, therefore. And so that's what ultimately only deserves to be put at the number 1 position. So, with that being said, those were my top 10 games of the decade. I hope you really enjoyed watching this video and, yeah, sharing in the nostalgia, I guess, you know, with me together. Of course, I don't really get to make videos like this anymore often these days. Tell me if you want me to bring back the on-camera stuff too, but while I still can, I want to quickly let you know, of course, to subscribe to the channel if you never were somehow. Make sure to hit the notification bell so you get uploads whenever I upload next, because this is the type of stuff I don't ever get to shout out anymore. You know, doing the scripted stuff that I do. I also still do live streams very frequently on Twitch, where I play games together with you all, so make sure you check me out, twitch.tv/RobinOyo. It's all linked in the description, of course, and you can support me on Patreon. For just $1 per month, you get a bunch of rewards, like early access to every single video that I make, and with that $1 of support by all of you, I get to make all of these great videos for you, yeah, and I get to spend my time doing this. So I would like to keep doing that. Just $1 of support helps me greatly in it and gives you early access to every single video and a couple of other cool rewards. So make sure you check out the Patreon, patreon.com/RobinGaming. And then for now, I want to thank you all a lot for watching. I really hope you enjoyed the video. Like I said, let me know your personal lists in the comments as well. And then I hope to see you again next time.